Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to QGTV. We're on day 8 of Ramadan 2011 reading. Today we'll be doing chapter 8/9. So I guess for some of you that sounds a little bit odd. Chapter 8/9, doesn't he mean chapter 8 and chapter 9? Well, no, I don't. I don't mean that, because I don't believe that At-Tawbah or chapter 9 is a chapter in itself. People say that At-Tawbah is a chapter, even though it doesn't have the Bismillah. It doesn't start with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And they say the reason is that here Allah doesn't show His attribute of mercy. Now, I go by the reverse logic. I say that as long as there's no Bismillah, I cannot claim that this is an independent chapter. Because as the Quran says in chapter 17 verse 106, that Allah divides the Quran. So the division of the Quran is in the name of Allah, Bismillah. So we can't assume that a chapter is a chapter unless a Bismillah begins it, and we can't assume a chapter ends unless there is a Bismillah which follows the end. So this obviously is not an orthodox opinion, but I do feel that it concords nicely with the Quran. Some people also say that the end of At-Tawbah, another thing to consider is that thematically speaking, so from the angle of the content and the themes, the beginning of Al-Anfal chapter 8 is very much concordant with the end of At-Tawbah or chapter 9. The beginning of Anfal begins with Allah and the Messenger. Allah and the Messenger are talked about in terms of nafila or perpetual blessings, but and also at the end of At-Tawbah, both Allah and the Messenger are mentioned. So that's in chapter in At-Tawbah verse 1 to 8 to 1 to 9, the last two verses. So that's thematically concordant. If you read the beginning of Anfal, it opens with Allah and the Messenger, and if you read the end of Tawbah, it ends with Allah and the Messenger. So you have a kind of an opening and closing thing going on there. In terms of the actual theme of chapter 8/9, it's essentially about a battle, a conflict, if you will. Even there is actually a scenario of war as well. But here we need to understand, because a lot of haters of Islam use this to say that, okay, Muslims are commanded to wage war on non-Muslims. This is entirely incorrect. First and foremost, the term Muslim, as we understand it in the world today, people of a certain civilization, history, society, culture, this does not exist in the Quran. The Quran uses the word Muslim, but it is for people of a certain behavioral pattern. So when the Quran tells Muslims to do something, it is telling people who are of a certain behavioral pattern to do something. It's not telling the Muslims, as it were. So in the same way, chapter 8/9 is about the warfare between the people who have believed in the message and the people who are oppressors. So here it is not, again, it's not about people who don't believe in the same book as you do. It's rather people who believe in values which are oppressive to humankind. That is essentially what this chapter is about. This chapter is about the believers' movement under Allah and His Messenger, so that they may establish justice and peace in the world. And that's very clear from terms like Masjid al-Haram, for example. Masjid al-Haram is a space where the hurumat or sanctities of Allah are in place. So in this space, believers are told to establish this Masjid al-Haram. In this space, believers are enjoined to create an environment where people are safe and secure. So it is not an oppressive environment. So if you compare this with uh, some notions of the Islamic State, you will find them to be diametrically opposite to the notion. So the beginning of chapter 8, I mean, I'm not going to break down the chapters because we have literally 204 verses to go through and countless sections. So that cannot be happening in 10 minutes. So I'm just going to give an overview of the chapter. Chapter 8 begins with the believers' movement. So they are talking about anfal, or as I said, perpetual fruits. Nafila is something which comes about as a result of your previous act. So if you did something to produce a certain fruit, the nafila would be the fruit of that fruit. So the beginning of chapter 8 is yas'alunaka anil anfal. They ask you about anfal. So people are asking about how to achieve this state where they can have perpetual fruits. And this is the mentality we need to have when we go into this chapter. And here Allah is telling us to take Allah and His Messenger as our governance. Now how do we do this exactly? I mean, you know, for people who say the Messenger is already dead, well, the Messenger is dead, but the vivification or personification of the message is not. So here we need to vivify and personify the message in as much as we can in order to bring this about. So the struggle in chapter 8. In chapter 8 the movement is beginning, yeah? It's Allah is talking about our attitudes, the nature of those who wish to oppress, the systemic battle, the setting up of Masjid al-Haram, that safe space, and Allah for the first time in the Quran, sequentially speaking again, for the first time Allah addresses the Nabi. The Nabi, or the Prophet, is the one who leads the believers. Now, why is the word Nabi here? Because he stands on a high platform. He is able to oversee the situation as it's happening. So at this point, at the point where the movement is still growing, it's just been given birth to, it's growing, the Nabi is thought to be the company of the believers, and he's the one who is rousing the believers for this struggle. And again, this struggle is the struggle for justice and to set up a space which is safe for all human beings. Right, next we move on to the chapter 9 part of chapter 8-9. So please don't be confused. We are not in a separate chapter now. We are still in the same chapter. I only call it Tawbah or 9 because you know, I'd like to follow the usual numbering system. I do not believe that it's another chapter. So 9, we are still talking about the same phase, the same theme, but now they have moved on to a new phase. They have already established the Masjid al-Haram, that safe space, yeah? So now God is instructing the believers how to set up treaties of peace with the people who would war against them. And they are to establish the masajid, the spaces where submission is made to Allah. These spaces are, again, if you followed our exposition yesterday, we spoke about the masjid being a place of beauty, where beauty is produced. Well, here Allah is telling us to establish these masjids and to cultivate these masjids. Then there is also the struggle and internal conflicts. This is from verse 38 to 72. It talks about the internal conflicts which take place between the believers and those who disbelieve within the system. So there are people who are in the system but do not really believe, and because of that they try to keep the system from moving forward. Then there is an address to the Nabi or the Prophet from verse 73 all the way to verse 118. Here it talks about the Nabi and managing those internal conflicts. So here the Nabi is being given the task of managing or administering that system. So there is a system in place, and the Nabi is being told, okay, these people, you can't trust them. These people, they are outside the system. Some of them are okay, some of them are not. There are other people who are completely giving themselves to the system. Those are the ones mentioned in verse 100, for example, where Allah says, radiyallahu anhum wa radu anhu. So Allah is well pleased with them, and they are well pleased with Him. Why? Because they are was-sabiquna awwaleen. They are the foremost of the foremost. So here there are people who are of lukewarm passion. There are people with no passion at all, and there are people with high levels of passion. And the Nabi is meant to oversee them. So at the end of chapter 8-9, it's an address to the believers. And it tells the believers to organize themselves well and to be cognizant of the signs which are coming to them. So it is, although it is a chapter about the administration of the system, so one would think it's very political as opposed to spiritual, there is still the link with the signs. There are signs coming to the believers, and the believers are enjoying to have an organic relationship with the Quran, because here it talks about surahs coming down. So when a surah is a coherent discourse, and when it's coming down to you, you're supposed to respond to it. So this is still a very spiritual surah in that sense. And right at the end of chapter 8/9, which is 9, 1-8, 1-9, it talks again about the messenger and about Allah. So Allah and the messenger are the opening concept, and also the closing concept. Essentially, this chapter is about the movement of the believers under Allah and His messenger. So the believers here, again, is not a religious concept, it's a concept for those who have trusted upon the system to move forward with it. So I hope I've helped bring some clarity to this chapter 8/9. I'm sorry I couldn't do a full exposition, but in time, after Ramadan, hopefully I'll do a passage by passage exposition on all these parts. So thank you very much again for your viewership. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll be doing chapter 10 and 11. Bye.